If you have ever wondered why an INFJ who once held you with an intensity that felt sacred could suddenly regard you with a distance so complete that it borders on non-existence, this is your story. You were something to them once. Perhaps you were their confidant, their safe space, the person they allowed past the carefully guarded walls of their inner world. And then, without warning or dramatic confrontation, you became nothing. Not hated, not even actively rejected. Simply erased, as though you had never truly registered in the first place. This is the peculiar terror of being nothing to someone whose feeling is so profound, whose empathy is so consuming, that their indifference feels like death itself. You spent months, perhaps years, trying to provoke a reaction. Anger would have meant something. Disappointment would have carried weight. But what you received instead was far more unsettling. A profound, crystalline indifference from someone you believed to be incapable of such cold precision. An INFJ does not do indifference lightly. They are wired for connection, for seeing into people, for holding the emotional complexity that others cannot bear. Yet when an INFJ nothings you, they do so with an authenticity and finality that cuts deeper than any betrayal. They have applied their formidable emotional intelligence not to loving you, but to the systematic withdrawal of their presence. Hate requires presence. It requires that you occupy enough space in someone's consciousness to be worth the intensity of opposition. An ordinary person might hate you and never think it through. But an INFJ who hates you is a rare and terrifying thing, because they will have excavated the full architecture of your failures, seen you with absolute clarity, and rejected you after deliberate consideration. Yet what you received was not even hate. It was something far colder, far more strategic. Indifference delivered by someone whose capacity for empathy makes that indifference utterly bulletproof. They do not hate you, because they have moved beyond the argument entirely. They have examined you, measured you against their standards of authenticity and integrity, and determined that you simply do not warrant their emotional energy. This is not ordinary indifference. This is the weaponized neutrality of someone with an emotional blueprint so intricate that they can simply close your file and move forward without a backward glance. True indifference, when delivered by an INFJ, is something far colder than ordinary coldness. It is the erasure of your relevance by someone who has the capacity to see you completely and has chosen not to. It is not the active destruction of connection, but the clinical recognition that the connection, perhaps, never truly existed at all. An INFJ does not require justification for this assessment. They do not need to explain it to you. They have simply looked into you with their penetrating vision, and found you insufficient. And they have the emotional discipline to walk away, and never look back. The word nothing contains the paradox that swallows entire histories. You can't be nothing to someone. Nothing is an absence. Yet here it is, spoken into being by an INFJ. I nothing you. Not I dislike you. Not I've moved beyond you. Not even I've forgotten you, because an INFJ does not forget. What they do is far more precise. They actively decide to stop thinking about you altogether, to relegate you to irrelevance despite their capacity to remember everything. This is the particular cruelty that only an INFJ can deliver, because they do not do this accidentally. They do this deliberately, having weighed you, measured you, and found you wanting. They have used their formidable insight, not to understand you with compassion, but to understand precisely how to withdraw from you most completely. You were something, perhaps. But you have become the kind of erasure that cannot even be called loss, because an INFJ does not lose things carelessly. They release them deliberately. What can you lose when what was present was never quite real to the person who held it? An INFJ may have given you access to their inner world, but they have the capacity to seal that door so completely that it is as though you were never inside it at all. They can rewrite the narrative of your importance retroactively. They can decide with absolute conviction that what felt like intimacy was actually only ever a transaction they were conducting, a test you failed, a pattern they were studying. And because an INFJ rarely speaks untruths, this revision of history carries the weight of absolute certainty. The Stoics understood a fraction of this. They spoke of the indifference required to live well, the capacity to observe attachment without claiming it, to see others with clarity untethered from emotional dependency. But even they understood indifference as a discipline, an achievement earned through years of philosophical practice. What we discuss now is different. This is indifference earned through betrayal, through the slow realization that your presence in another person's life has become less significant than their morning coffee. This is an indifference as a verdict. This is indifference, akin to dying before death. There exists a particular archetype for those who can deliver this kind of nothing, and the INFJ embodies it more completely than any other type. They are not the vengeful ones, not the dramatic expulsionists who burn bridges in flames. They are something rarer and more psychologically sophisticated. They are the withdrawers. Such withdrawers love with an intensity that borders on mystical, only to sever that love with an equal and opposite force of indifference. INFJs are wired with what might be called a doorslam capacity, an ability to shut people out so completely that it is as though the door to intimacy never existed. They are creatures of such refined self-preservation that they have learned to treat human connection as conditional infrastructure, something they can simply stop maintaining the moment they determine that you are no longer aligned with their deeply held values or authenticity requirements. The INFJ is rare, perhaps 1 to 2% of the population. They spend their lives feeling too much, seeing too much, understanding the hidden motivations and shadow selves of those around them. This constant empathic load is exhausting. This is why most INFJs are selective about their connections. When they do open their inner world to someone, it is an act of profound vulnerability. They are showing you their deepest selves, trusting that you understand the fragility of what they are sharing. But this same capacity for depth, for authentic connection, is what makes their withdrawal so complete. When an INFJ determines that you have violated their trust, misunderstood their offering, or, worst of all, proven yourself inauthentic, they do not gradually distance themselves. They do not give you second chances. They make a swift, often shocking and utterly final decision. You are no longer part of their world. The moment they determine you are unworthy of their emotional energy, you do not get expelled with explanation or anger. You are simply allowed to sink into irrelevance, and the most terrible part is that they do this without regret, without looking back, without even acknowledging that there is something to regret. This is efficiency. This is the weaponized integrity of someone who has decided that you violated the authenticity they require, and therefore, you are no longer real to them. The psychological mechanism here is both simple and devastating, and it is uniquely INFJ. The INFJ has accomplished something that most humans take a lifetime to learn. They have decoupled their self-worth from your opinion of them. More than that, they have decoupled your entire existence from their emotional budget, through a process of unsentimental reassessment. You had perhaps believed that you held some essential place in their consciousness, that you mattered enough to have been let into their inner sanctum, to have been chosen by someone so selective. But they have made the clinical determination that you do not warrant the energy of their continued attention. You are a low-priority thread in their consciousness, one they have simply closed. And because the INFJ sees with such penetrating clarity, this assessment is not made in emotion, but in the cold light of their intuitive knowing. They have understood with absolute certainty what you are, and what they have understood is that you are not enough. The INFJ's empathy is their superpower and their vulnerability. They can read people like texts, understanding the subtext beneath words, the contradictions between stated values and actual behavior. the shadow selves that people hide from themselves. This capacity makes them extraordinary listeners, profound lovers, and devastatingly effective judges of character. When an INFJ sees you, they truly see you. They understand your patterns, your defenses, your deepest wounds. But this same clarity means that when an INFJ decides you are inauthentic, duplicitous, or fundamentally misaligned with their values, there is no arguing with that assessment. They have not judged you carelessly. They have looked into you with their penetrating vision and made their determination. The cruelty of it is that this is not cruelty at all. It is merely clarity applied without mercy. It is the application of their formidable emotional intelligence in the service of protecting themselves from further deception. Consider the precise moment when an INFJ decides you are nothing. It is likely not dramatic, but it is memorable for them in a way that it is not for you. There is no confrontation, no tearful goodbye, no clear demarcation line that you can point to and say, "Here, this is where I died," in their heart. Instead, it is something far quieter and far more unsettling. It is the moment when they are asking you a question about something that matters, and they see the answer in your face before you speak. They see the lie you are about to tell, or the compromise you are about to make, or the inauthenticity behind your words. And in that moment, something shifts in them. They have seen behind the curtain. They have understood, with crystal clarity, that you are not who they believed you to be. Or perhaps worse, that you never were. That they misread you. That their feigned intuition, their supposed superpower, failed them. This realization is not something an INFJ can unsee. They are not capable of selective blindness. They cannot unknow what they have intuited. And so from that moment forward, the door begins to close. It might take days, weeks or months. But the INFJ has already made the decision. They have already moved on internally. They are simply going through the motions of what remains. And their perfect courtesy, their measured politeness, their continued presence, are not signs of lingering connection. They are the autopilot of someone who has already left. When they finally withdraw completely, when they finally deliver the nothing, they are simply making real what has already been decided internally. You are no longer real to them. And they will not expend the energy to explain why. The peculiarity of being nothing to an INFJ is that it cannot be fought. You cannot argue against indifference delivered by someone whose empathy is so developed that they have deliberately chosen not to extend it to you. You cannot deploy charm to win back the attention of someone who has used their penetrating intuition to determine that your charm is a defense mechanism, a lie you tell yourself. You cannot appeal to their feelings because an INFJ who has decided you are nothing has already integrated that decision into their emotional framework. They are not suppressing empathy for you. They have reconceptualized you in a way that places you outside the boundaries of their empathy entirely. You are not a person they are choosing not to feel for. You are not a person they feel called to feel for anymore. The hated can sometimes transform hatred into love, through dramatic redemption, or steady persistence. But the nothing-ed INFJ will not even register your efforts to rebuild the connection. They have not closed the door and locked it. They have sealed the door with such thoroughness that there is literally no point of entry. The indifference is not personal. It is not even conscious in the way that a chosen coldness is conscious. It is merely the natural consequence of their having moved beyond you entirely. Psychology tells us that the opposite of love is not hate but rather indifference. It is indifference. The psychiatrist Erich Fromm understood this deeply. Love requires recognition. Hate requires recognition. But indifference requires nothing at all. It is the emotional equivalent of a vacuum. And when an INFJ has decided that you occupy that space, you have been subjected to a kind of psychological erasure that most people cannot even comprehend until it happens to them. The INFJ, with their capacity for seeing into the human soul, knows precisely how to deliver this nothing. They know that the worst thing they can do is not to hurt you actively, but to unsee you, to retract the recognition that made you feel real. You have become the nothing that was once somebody, to someone who was uniquely equipped to make that transformation feel absolute. There is something almost mythological about this, something ancient and timeless. In the tales of the underworld, there are stories of people forgotten so completely that they fade entirely from existence. Not destroyed, not actively punished, simply forgotten. This is the terror that underpins many dark mythologies, not the monster that hunts you, but the universe that simply ceases to acknowledge you exist. And when another person embodies that mythic indifference, when they become the avatar of your irrelevance, you are confronted with a fate that feels like annihilation, precisely because it is so thoroughly non-violent. The process of being reduced to nothing by an INFJ follows a pattern that is distinctive and, once understood, heartbreakingly recognizable. First, there is abundance. You occupy their thoughts regularly. They find reasons to see you, to include you, to weave you into their internal world. An INFJ in love is a rare and consuming thing. They see you with such depth that they make you feel more real than you have ever felt. They hold your contradictions without judgment. They understand your shadow self and love it anyway. You are wanted, and more than that, you are understood. Then, gradually, the frequency decreases. You are still wanted, but perhaps not needed in the same way. The INFJ begins to notice small inconsistencies in your character, nothing catastrophic. Just a few little fractures in the facade of authenticity they thought they saw. They mention something, and watch how you respond. They are testing you, whether consciously or unconsciously. Slowly, it becomes functional. You see each other because you have made arrangements, not because the desire to see you originates from within them. The INFJ becomes more observant than participatory. They are gathering data. They are assembling their final assessments. Then comes the phase where you are tolerated. They are not actively rejecting you, but you have become barely remarkable. Where once they sought your company, now they endure it. Where once they revealed themselves to you, now they reveal nothing. They have become polite. They have become distant. They have become the version of themselves that they show to the outside world. The warmth is gone, and you, sensing this, try harder. You attempt to recapture what you had, to prove your worth, to demonstrate your authenticity. But the INFJ is no longer looking. They have already made their determination. And finally, you arrive at the point where you are nothing. They would not avoid you. They would simply not seek you. Your existence has become optional in the most fundamental way, and the INFJ, having made this decision, will not second-guess it. They do not operate in shades of gray. They see in absolutes. You are either aligned with their truth, or you are not, and they have decided you are not. There is something clarifying about this, though it takes years to access that clarity, and perhaps even longer for an INFJ to experience it. When an INFJ decides you are nothing, they are rendering a verdict not just on your value, but on your understanding of connection itself. They are telling you, without words, that the bond you thought existed was not as mutual as you believed. They are revealing that they had an exit strategy all along, a precise emotional calculus that could, at any moment, determine that you were disposable. This is difficult information. This is information that rewires something fundamental about how you trust, how you believe in connection, how you allow yourself to be seen by others. And for the INFJ who has delivered this nothing, it is information that validates their deepest fear. That their ability to see into people, their famed intuition, is imperfect. That they themselves can be fooled. That the very empathy that makes them extraordinary can also make them susceptible to being used by people who exploit their capacity to forgive. The shadow side of being nothing when the person who nothings you is an INFJ is that it teaches you what you perhaps never wanted to know. That emotional intelligence can be deployed with surgical precision as a weapon. The INFJ, once they have decided you are nothing, possesses a comprehensive understanding of your vulnerabilities, insecurities, and patterns. They know exactly what would hurt you most. And yet they do not use this knowledge for cruelty. They use it for something far more effective. complete and utter indifference. They are not punishing you. They are simply removing you from their world with such clinical efficiency that you cannot even generate anger toward them. They have used their superpower not to harm you actively, but to render you invisible. And you, having watched this process unfold, become aware of your own capacity to be understood and then discarded. You realize that the people in your life are not safe from an INFJ's withdrawal, should that INFJ determine they no longer align with your truth. You acknowledge that you too, if you possessed the INFJ's clarity, could do the same to others. And that realization changes you. It does not necessarily make you cruel, but it does make you acutely aware of the power of authentic seeing followed by deliberate unseeing. In ancient philosophy, Medusa represented the power of the gaze that turns living things to stone. But there is another kind of gaze, one perhaps equally powerful, the gaze that refuses to see at all, the gaze that looks through you rather than at you. This is the gaze of the one who has decided you are nothing, and under that gaze, you become insubstantial, secondary, barely real. You exist in the space between present and absent, and in that liminal space, you are finally forced to confront the truth that your presence in someone's life is not guaranteed, that you must continue to matter, or you will slip into irrelevance, that love is not unconditional, despite what we tell ourselves. It is conditional on maintaining the perceived value that made it worth the effort in the first place. The most unsettling aspect of being nothing to an INFJ is that it strips away the narrative you had constructed, and replaces it with a counter-narrative delivered with such authority that it feels immutable. You had believed that this person loved you, or at least respected you, or at least saw you. But their indifference suggests something else. They had never constructed the reciprocal narrative at all. You were projecting onto a blank surface, mistaking silence for agreement, and mistaking a lack of rejection for acceptance. You were, in essence, invisible all along. And because an INFJ possesses such penetrating insight, when they tell you, or worse when their silence tells you, that it was always this way, you cannot help but wonder if they are right. Did they ever really love you, or were they always studying you? Could an INFJ with their supposed clarity have been wrong about you initially, or were you always just someone to observe until you revealed your true nature? This is the particular torture of being nothing-ed by someone with such seeing power. You cannot even trust your own memory of connection, because they are equipped to make you doubt whether the connection was ever real at all. This realization arrives like a particular kind of cold, not the warmth-draining cold of betrayal, where you feel something being taken from you, but the cold of correction, of understanding that what you thought was there never was. The cold of stepping outside in the morning and realizing it is winter, and you have been dressed for spring. The cold of clarity comes too late to be useful. You are finally, completely, unmistakably nothing. And the person who gave you that title did so without malice, which somehow makes it worse. There is a reason that this particular form of erasure has become something that people speak of with such intensity, such hurt, such desperate incomprehension, because it represents the final failure of love, or the final failure of belief in love. It is the moment when you understand that someone can share your bed, your secrets, your time, and still regard you as fundamentally irrelevant. It is the moment when you realize that presence does not guarantee connection. That vulnerability does not guarantee reciprocation. That constancy does not guarantee being seen. You can be nothing to someone, and they can be entirely at peace with that nothing. The paradox that sits at the heart of this is that the person who nothings you is often the person least equipped to understand the impact of that nothing. They have decided you are not worth their emotional energy, which means they likely will not spend the emotional energy to consider what this feels like for you. Your pain becomes irrelevant, not because they are actively cruel, but because they have already relegated you to irrelevance. You cannot because someone who has not acknowledged your existence enough to consider your hurt. This is the final cruelty hidden within the apparent cruelty. The person who nothings you is immune to the pain they cause, because they have already deleted you from their system. Yet here is what persists, what the philosophy of indifference cannot quite capture. The nothing that was spoken leaves a mark. Not because it is true, but because it was spoken by someone who mattered. The nothing echoes precisely because it came from somewhere with gravitational weight. The person who decided you were nothing had, at some point, apparently decided you were something. They gave you a particular kind of attention. They allowed you to believe you mattered, and then they revised that assessment. That revision, even delivered with such perfect neutrality, carries the weight of being seen and found insufficient. Being nothing is, paradoxically, the most intimate form of rejection, because it requires that you were close enough to be erased. Distance cannot erase you. Proximity can. So where does this leave you? In the strange space where you were something, then nothing, and then slowly, over months and years, you become something different again. Not a victim, because victims matter enough to have been hurt. Not a survivor, because that implies you were in danger. But perhaps something more like a person who has been changed by understanding their own impermanence in someone else's world. A person who has learned that they are not essential. And that knowledge, once acquired, cannot be unlearned. You will never again believe completely in your own permanence in anyone's life. You will never again trust that your presence alone is enough. You have been nothing, and the memory of that nothing will stay with you like a scar, not as a sign of survival, but as a sign of having been marked by indifference. The gift, if it can be called a gift, is this. You now understand the weight of the nothing that you yourself can deliver. You understand the power of deciding that someone is no longer worth the energy. You understand that love is not a given but a choice, and that choice can be revoked. You understand that you are not obligated to feel a connection to anyone, no matter how much they might long for it. You have learned the cold mathematics of emotional relevance, and that knowledge is both liberating and isolating. You are free from the obligation to care about people who have decided you are nothing. But you are also condemned to know that you could do the same to others. In the end, "I don't hate you, I nothing you" is a sentence that destroys the very logic of hate. It removes the possibility of redemption that hate contains. It seals the door that anger still leaves slightly ajar. It is the final word, delivered with such perfect neutrality that it cannot even be argued against. You are nothing. Not to someone who hates you, but to someone who has decided that you do not merit the energy of emotion at all. And in that nothing, in that perfect indifference, you have been subjected to a kind of erasure that is far more complete than any enemy could ever achieve. Yet the nothing persists. It echoes. It changes you. It teaches you truths about love, connection, and human fragility that you would have been happier never knowing. It marks you, not with the badge of someone who was hated, but with the far stranger mark of someone who was simply deemed irrelevant. And you carry that with you, that knowledge that you could be nothing to someone, that all of us could be. That connection is far more fragile than we want to believe, and that indifference is the most efficient weapon in the human arsenal, precisely because it does not even feel like a weapon at all. The question that haunts you now, the question that you are left sitting with, is this. Once you have been nothing to someone, how do you allow yourself to be something to anyone again? How do you trust in connection after you have felt the cold precision of being erased? How do you rebuild your sense of relevance after someone has so thoroughly demonstrated your irrelevance? And perhaps most disturbing, how do you ensure that you do not inflict the same nothing onto someone else, now that you know exactly how? These are the questions that follow you. These are the paradoxes you must learn to sit with. Because the nothing, once spoken, cannot be unspoken, and the person who was nothing is forever changed. If this has resonated with you, if you are an INFJ reading this and recognizing yourself in the capacity to deliver nothing with such precision, if you have felt the particular cold of being nothing to an INFJ who mattered, please share your story in the comments. Because the paradox is this. INFJs are rare precisely because they feel so deeply, see so clearly, and withdraw so completely when their authenticity requirements are not met. The more we speak of nothing, the more we refuse to let it be silent. The more we acknowledge the erasure, the more we reclaim our relevance, not through changing ourselves to fit another person's requirements, but through understanding that we were always enough. You are not nothing. You never were. You were simply seen by an INFJ who was determined, in their clarity, to see nothing. And that tells you far more about the limits of their journey than it ever could about your worth. Subscribe to continue this exploration of connection, erasure, and the paradoxes that shape rare and complex individuals, because there are more stories of INFJ withdrawals that need to be witnessed, more experiences of that particular kind of indifference that need to be named. Join us as we sit with the questions that refuse easy answers, as we explore the contradictions that define the INFJ's walk, and as we learn to find meaning in the spaces where authenticity seems impossible. Connection feels like a luxury only the less feeling can afford. In that conversation you will never be nothing. In that conversation your voice matters, precisely because you have the capacity to truly see and be seen by those who understand what it costs.